Hi y'all. Well, you join me again. Doing a little fishing session. Joy. Nothing's happened so far. Been a couple of hours. Wow, and afterwards Rodney trotters have been in. So it's early days. But obviously I'll be up the fish farm later on. I'll drop in there on the way back from here and just check everything's all right. But it was all good yesterday and we've had no more rain, so everything should be tickety-boo. So I thought I'd just do a specific one on the feed we use at Fensmere, both at the fish farm and on Fensmere itself, why we use it, and some trends that will be occurring through the the bait business and also the sort of fish farm feeding businesses. That's happening. It's happening right now, and it'll affect all of us. So I initially started using the Coppins Intensive pellet. Now the Coppins Intensive is a 40% protein, 10% fat, very good fishmeal-based pellet. But unfortunately, it only comes as a biggest. It only comes as a 9mm, and I just think that when you're feeding sort of decent quantities, and especially if you haven't had the chance to really get your lake, take all the silvers out, tench out, etc., then you're losing too much feed in my mind to smaller fish before the carp have a chance to get on it. So I wanted a bigger pellet. Now Coppins do a bigger pellet, but only in a higher fat content, and I wasn't prepared to put a 15% fat pellet in there. So I changed from a Coppins to a Gousson, which is a French manufacturer, pellet manufacturer. They do a pellet which is a Mega T or Tia Tang, which is pretty much exactly the same profile as the Coppins pellet. 40% protein, it's 11% fat, but they do it in a 15mm pellet, and that really suited me. I do also buy it in a 9 as well. And I also buy smaller pellet. I buy stuff to bring the small fish on. So from sort of under 1 mil to 1 mils, 2 mils, 4 mils, and then that does the progression as the fish grow. But I generally will feed with the same quality pellet. I don't feed with a high fat pellet. I don't feed with a lower protein pellet. I feed with as high protein as possible and as lower fat as possible. And all of them, of course, are fishmeal based. Now I like the 15mm because obviously they're bigger. So initially the smaller fish cannot get at them, and because they're bigger, they've got a slightly slower breakdown rate, and so therefore I just believe that I've got more chance of my main fish that I'm feeding having the chance to eat that. In a lake like the main lake at the fish farm, for instance, as well. After spawning, you've got the small fish of, you're going to get some small fish coming through that survive through spawning and etc., and then start coming through, especially this year in the main lake, because all of those fish are now into their C4, they're into their 4th summer. And there'll be a lot of them that'll be sexually mature, and there's going to be, I would say, a lot of C1s developed this year. So obviously those C1s are ravenous little creatures. And again, if I'm feeding with a smaller pellet, you've got more chance of the C1s, which you're not keeping all of them, for instance, you see. There might be 5,000 C1s come through. And if those 5,000 are smashing into your pellet that's designed to put weight on your main fish, your C4s, then obviously you're losing in one, this sort of taking it out of one fish, which is your more profitable fish, and putting it into a C1, which you're going to grade down to. For us, we'll grade those 5,000 down to probably 300 or 400 or 500 fish in the first grading. So you've fed a load of fish for absolutely nothing if that's the case. So the bigger pellet, again, for us, for me, means that I believe that I'm just getting through to the bigger fish. I'm feeding them more specifically and more targeted, with a more targeted measure. Through the summer last year on the fish farm, because I knew there was lots of C1s had come through, I was actually doing a load of maize. I cook it up in a big Burco boiler. I'll show the process later on this year. And I was feeding that around the marginal areas. Again, trying to keep them off of the pellet areas as much as possible and get them feeding on the maize, which is obviously cheaper, keeps them going, and hopefully keeps them out the way of taking my more expensive pellet. So that was the reason, and there was also a financial reason. The Goussaint we were able to get at a better price. I mean, we're using, this year's going to be over 10 tonne, which is relatively small amount for some of these, some of the bigger fish farms. But as I say, we're only a small fish farm and the lake. And that 10 tonne in effect is the whole year's worth. But I buy for each part of the season. So I've had my winter load, which I showed in when I did the barn clear out, and I showed you where I keep the feed. So I'll have an amount that I know I'm going to need through the winter. That'll all be gone probably by the middle of March, which I'll have already ordered a new load of pellet in. And the new load of pellet comes in fresh, literally made to order. It comes in fresh, and that'll last just through that summer period into autumn, and I'll get another load in. And that I find is the best way to manage it. You don't want a load of pellet just sitting there, especially through the summer in the heat. You have got fats and stuff in there. It's just going to denature. You want it fresh as you can, and it's going to be best for the fish. So get it in when you're going to use it, and don't try and keep it for too long a period. So the Goussaint's provided us with a really good pellet. I'm really happy with it. And that leads us on to another part of this little chat, which is the seas and our production of fish meals is changing. And I know multiple bait makers and bait manufacturers, and there are certain fish meals which are now getting harder and harder to get hold of. And I would think that within the next few years, you'll see a complete stop of fishmeal baits. I just think that it'll be too hard to get, too expensive to get hold of. And it's because of obviously the way in which some of these fish meals are caught or used or developed is creating environmental issues, according to the environmental scientists. And obviously these big trawlers, as I think I've mentioned before, that they are super effective at what they do, and they can literally empty a part of an ocean. So, I understand that, using fish, something from the sea, for our fishing pleasure is probably not the most economical and environmentally friendly method. So that leads us on to what's happening. And now with the Goussaint pellet, what I noticed initially when I got it had a slightly, it was a spicier and a sweeter smell to it. And when you closer in look at the ingredients, they are using a chicken meal, a poultry meal. And that's who's adding and supplementing the fish meals, but it's also adding to the, obviously the profile of that bait in terms of its fat content and also its protein content. And that use of poultry meal, of chicken meal, along with your insect meals, your nuts, etc., are going to become a much more mainstay and main staple, I think, of our baits and our pellets going forward if we're going to use animal-based pellets. Now, obviously, there's great companies out there that are making some superb pellets on a vegetable-based pellet. BP Milling is doing a great job making some fantastic pellet. Now, it's hard, I can't get it over here. Otherwise, I would use some of his pellet for sure, but I wouldn't use it all year round. I would use it through the summer period when the amounts of natural food within our lake are at the highest, and there's a lot of natural there, which has got a lot of protein, and that's also going to have the calcium and everything else that they need in their diet. So I would probably then feed, if I was putting 3 bags in my feeder, I'd put 2 bags of the vegetable, 1 bag of the fish meal based, and that would be the ratio mix I'll use through the summer. Obviously the vegetable based baits are cheaper as well, and probably creating less environmental impact on your water quality. But the reason I wouldn't use them all year round is purely down to the fish's digestive systems. They can digest a fish meal in lower temperatures than potentially they can with a vegetable based bait. Now again, Ben might say he doesn't agree with me on that. You know, my research suggests that that is the case, and they're better using a fish meal or a veg or a animal-based protein through the colder months when their enzymatic concentrations are just not working as well because the temperatures are not right. You know, optimal temperatures for carp in terms of their digestive system is around that 25 degrees. Well, that's bloody warm. If it's 5 degrees, 8 degrees in the water, then, you know, their enzymes are not breaking stuff down super efficiently. And I want them to be able to still process that and be able to grow a little bit through that winter period. Now, it isn't to say they're not going to grow on a vegetable based, because obviously they do. But that's just my personal preference, just giving you and telling you what I do. So this particular summer, I am going to get Goussaint Maker vegetable based pellet, which I'm going to use and supplement it exactly how I said. Obviously, I'd say as well, there's a greater breakdown. The vegetable-based pellets are going to break down quicker. So therefore, you want them to be eaten quicker, probably, than a fish meal-based or a, you know, poultry-based insect meals, etc. that will be coming in. All right, so that sort of looks at those sorts of those caveats and those things that we're doing here. And the other side of it is using at certain times of year a specially made boilie. I've fed specifically over the years on Fensmere to develop our fish. I had one particular summer where I had 24 meal baits made up, and this was the same reason that I've alluded to with using a bigger pellet. That was when the leanies in the lake were coming through, and I wanted to specifically target feeding them in a different way to target feeding the bigger fish. So I made up 24, I had 24 mil high protein fish meal baits made up with a garlic and immune boosters. So I can use, and that leads into what I'm just about to go on about, which I'll sit down and chat with one of my good friends, Billy Berridge, who works alongside the guys at Target Baits. Now, Target are one of the big suppliers of bait products and bait making products around the UK. He's just making us up now an immune booster for the spring. So I'll have a few hundred kilos of a targeted boilie with things to help the fish come through that spring period when they're under the most amount of stress. When that water temperature comes above 10 and it's before sort of 15 degrees, especially in this last couple of years, it's been hovering up and down and going up and down like a fiddler's elbow, and that is not good for fish coming out of their sort of winter lethargic state. Their immune system's suppressed at that time, and they're in a much more vulnerable position to having a bacterial or viral takedown. So I want to give them every chance to boost out of that and come out of that period strong and super healthy. So I'm going to be feeding with a specific boilie, which is with targeted nutrition and supplements to really help that fish come through the spring period as strong as possible. And we'll go into that in more detail when Billy's over in the next few weeks, actually. So he'll be bringing that over, and we'll be sitting down and chatting about that in a little bit more detail, give you a little bit more of an insight into that sort of bait making side of things, and look into a little bit more of the details of that and the science behind it. All right, so I thought I'd just give this one, a little chinwag about pellet. I haven't gone yet into talking about, the quantities we feed. I should probably touch upon it. I don't script any of this stuff. I'm just blabbling. Now, there's a lot of talk out there at the moment with, carp being put into lakes. I'm not going to mention companies and what have you, or fish farms. Different people are doing different stuff with their fish farms. I'm not one that's going to say, well, this is right and that's wrong. Carp fishing has changed so absolutely astro-biblically in the last 40 years since I started, that I find it pretty hypocritical. People just going, oh, we're poo-pooing this fish because, it's not an original grown in England fish, or its heritage is this or that. I bet we've got to remember, Donald Leaney were the first person really to stock proper fish into the UK. And before that, we were in wildies, little commony wildies. Donald Leaney went over and sourced his fish from Poland and got them in from Holland, and put them in, and we call them our original fish. Okay, so I think it's pretty hypocritical when, you know, people are doing things with fish in terms of breeding, crossbreeding, etc., to try and get the very best fish possible, the fastest growing, the most beautiful, etc. And people go, oh, well, it's not an original, it's not. I don't know about all that. It seems a bit of bollocks to me. I understand that you want to fish for fish that have maybe naturally grown up in a lake. But again, very few of you actually do that. Most of the fish have been stocked into those lakes. They haven't bred there and they haven't grown on in there. And if we were fishing like we used to 20, 30, 40 years ago, you'd be fishing for doubles and the occasional 20, right? We're fishing for massive fish now. And that's a byproduct of very good breeding, very good nutrition, and lots more of it. Okay. So, you know, I think that there's a lot to be said for people that are pushing the envelope with the breeding and development of carp, and there's no reason why the UK can't have its fishes to the same sort of size that we have over here in France and across Europe, and that's pretty much borne out now. You're seeing that across the UK, some huge fish. I can't even comprehend it compared to when we were fishing. Caught an upper double, it was huge in the early 80s. I remember the first 20 slipping over the net cord, you know, mid 80s, just like, what a beast. Totally different ball game now. It's just a different scenario. So that leads me on to what I'm doing feeding wise. So my feeding ratios, because my stocking ratios are relatively low for a fish farm, you know, for an intensive fish farm, especially from the UK, would be a much higher stocking density than I do. And therefore I know that my lake still has a lot of natural, and because I use calcium carbonate and I'm looking after my water quality all the time, I know that there's a lot of invertebrates, there's a lot of bloodworm, there's a lot of natural food in the lakes. So therefore I'm just supplementing that, and I'll supplement that up to, I think, probably 1.5 to 1.7% of their of the mass, of total biomass within that lake a day at the peak periods of time. That would be through the summer. And again, I monitor it with cameras, and if they're not eating, I don't feed. If they're eating and they really stuffing, and I think I can get a bit more into them, and I think it's okay, the water can handle it, the quality of the water can handle it, no problem, I'll give them a little bit more. But there's a combination of going to getting a good growth rate, which is sustainable and creating healthy fish, to pushing too much weight onto them too quickly, causing issues with fatty livers and causing issues with the fish's longevity and life. And I'm not up for that. I'm a fisherman. I love me carp, and I want to make sure that fish that I breed and we stock out into lakes have good long life. They're fit, healthy fish. They haven't been force fed to grow. You know, and a fish grown on a supplementary diet of around that 1.5%, I think is Optimus Prime for creating a really good growth rate, and not pushing them too hard that you're going to have problems in the longevity of those fish. All right, so it's been a bloody long one because I do tend to rabbit. If anyone got any questions about the pellet side of things, any of you out there using it in your fisheries, you know, fish farms, a lot of people, you know, do start to supplement feed now, especially I know a few of my mates over in the UK get pellet in and supplementary feed just to keep their fish ticking over and just get that weight on them a little bit more. So if you've got any questions regarding anything like this, just hit us up on the YouTube channel, or check us out on our Facebook pages at either Fensmere or Fensmere Fish Farm on Facebook, and tap us up. All right, I'll catch you later, hopefully. I'm going to catch a kipper. See yous. Bye-bye. All right. So, lovely little fish came to visit this afternoon. The shape of this beauty. 44.5. Look at that. What an absolute belter. Bobby Dazzler, look. Look at that. That's the mouth. That's the mouth of a massive crayfish eating monster. Look at that. Okay. Let me show you this other side. A beautiful fish. Beautiful, wild, public beast. Look at that. What a beauty. Absolutely immaculate. Might never have been caught before. Yeah, that's a nice way to spend a day after a few floods. Lovely jubbly.